This is the Capitol Rundown.
It's not a perfect bill, but it does everything that my taxpayers are asking me to do in the sense of reducing spending.
There are so many good things that are happening. We've got a lot more good work to do, and if we do it together, we're going to be successful.
Well, if she had a magic wand, she would be waving it across the entire nation, and the wand would say, "Come to Michigan."
It's all straight ahead. The Capitol Rundown starts now.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Sherry Jones. We had quite a week this week in Washington, one that only seems to happen once or twice a decade, when a Democrat is in the White House and Republicans are in charge of at least one half of Congress. And that's when Republicans try to squeeze the president to advance their agenda as the debt ceiling draws near. Well, it did happen again this year. Both sides reached a compromise, and Congress passed a plan to avert a default with only days to spare. We kick off our coverage with Washington correspondent Natalie Brand.
Calling it a big win for the American people, President Biden is promising to sign as soon as possible the bill that raises the nation's debt ceiling and avoids a government default.
On this vote, the yeas are 63, the nays are 36. The 60-vote threshold having been achieved, the bill is passed.
The Senate passed the legislation late Thursday with bipartisan support, even as 31 Republicans, 4 Democrats, and Senator Bernie Sanders voted against it.
We may be a little tired, but we did it.
President Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy brokered the deal, which cleared the Senate quickly despite a last-minute push to tack on various amendments.
The Biden-McCarthy deal is not conservative in any way, shape, or form.
This isn't the piece of legislation I would write, but at the same time, we can't risk defaulting on the full faith and credit of the United States.
Senators did secure a commitment from leaders to consider emergency spending down the road and additional military aid to support the war in Ukraine.
Navy.
Republican Lindsey Graham was among those pressing for more defense spending.
There's not a penny in this budget to help beat Putin.
The bill now heads to the White House just ahead of Monday's deadline, when the Treasury Secretary said the U.S. would start running short of cash to pay its bills. Natalie Brand, CBS News, Washington.
Well, the Rundown caught up with 2 representatives from Michigan the day of the House vote to get their take. Both Alyssa Slotkin and Tim Walberg voted for the proposal. Neither of them got everything they wanted, but neither one expected to either.
I guess to say it's not a perfect bill, but it does everything that my taxpayers are asking me to do in the sense of reducing spending, stopping deficit spending, put controls on government itself, and put even controls on the administration, so that if they want to spend for a new program, they have to find a way to cut other programs. That's a good thing.
I think the takeaway is we were facing this financial cliff that would have deeply hurt every American and, frankly, the global economy along with it. And even though Washington has a lot of problems, the urgency of that cliff got people to make a deal. And they hear people on the left and the right complaining about that deal because compromise is never universally loved. So we averted a crisis. That's important. Washington has a lot of problems, but when push came to shove, we're not going to let our country go over the cliff.
When we come back, we'll turn our attention back to Michigan and talk with Governor Gretchen Whitmer about an unusual challenge, getting more people to move to the Great Lakes state. That's when the Capitol Rundown continues. When it comes to Michigan politics, it was a big week on a little island. Lawmakers, lobbyists, and lots of other people flooded Mackinac Island for the annual policy conference. Now, the Rundown had a chance to sit down with Governor Gretchen Whitmer to tackle a couple of topics. And as we rank 49th when it comes to population growth, we asked her about what's happening to get more people to move to Michigan.
Well, you know, we're growing, but we're just not growing as fast as other states. And losing a congressional seat, it means losing power in Washington, D.C. We need to grow as a state, and that's why I think strategic, a growth strategy, whether it is around infrastructure, improving outcomes for kids in schools, or simply growing our talented workforce, are things that should unite us, Democrats and Republicans alike. There are so many good things that are happening. We've got a lot more good work to do, and if we do it together, we're going to be successful. And I'm so pleased to see the conference theme of the power of and. It's collaboration. It's not labor or business. It's not Democrats or Republicans. It's not the West Side or the UP or Detroit. It's got to be all of us in this. And we're making progress. To see people feel pretty optimistic about Michigan's future that's a good sign, but we can't make any assumptions. We got to keep doing the work. Michigan's got a great skilled workforce, and we're closing the skills gap with our Futures for Frontliners and the Michigan Reconnect and the Michigan Achievement Scholarship. That's one component. Another is we already have, whether it's Hemlock Semiconductor or the work that's happening in the Keweenaw Peninsula or in Bay County, we've got some phenomenal work being done around semiconductors and components to that. We would like to land a gigafactory. I think the auto industry would love for that to happen as well. We're going to continue to make sure that Michigan is competitive, that we've got the workforce to do the jobs, and I think all of these are factors that go into our success. We've got a low cost of living, a high quality of life. We've got advanced manufacturing and good jobs here. 21% of the world's fresh surface water. People are going to start migrating to Michigan out of necessity, but that's not a growth strategy. Our growth strategy has to be around talent, keeping our talent here, which we do a decent job of, despite what we all think. Richard Florida's kind of correcting that myth, but we've got more work to do here.
When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Governor Whitmer, but we'll talk about bipartisanship and the budget when the Capitol Rundown returns. Welcome back. We continue our conversation with Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and this time we asked her about the budget. Her party controls the legislature as well as the executive branch. So we asked her about how bipartisan this budget might be and how there's still a lot of work to be done.
The legislature is the legislature and the executive branch is the executive branch. No matter who's running either, we don't all see eye to eye. We're going to have to negotiate some things in the budget, but I still anticipate that we will get it done well in advance of July 1st, is what the legislature has told me, and I'm counting on that. I know that the legislature has pulled in the minority, that they've had ample opportunity to work on the budgets together at that level, but ultimately, you're right. We got to get budgets done. They need to be bipartisan. The whole time I was in the legislature, I voted for every budget. I had certain feelings on different sub-budgets within an omnibus, but at the end of the day, if you want to fund schools, if you want to make sure hospitals stay open and that cops and first responders have the resources they need, we got to get these budgets done and give them immediate effect. So I think those things unify people, but I'm never going to take it for granted. I'm always going to make a seat at the table for the Republicans and the Democrats. We don't want to look like Washington, D.C., where they're bumping up, against a potential catastrophic debt limit crisis. We can't play games. We've got to get a budget done. We've got time to do it, and I think that it's going to be an inclusive process, and we'll negotiate it. But I think every one of us takes that very seriously, how important it is. And God knows none of us wants to look like Washington, D.C. right now. After the budget, we still have got a number of things that we want to work on, but I assume the legislature will take a break, as they always do, and that's not a bad thing, actually. But I'll stay focused on growing our population. We'll have a report done by the end of the year, giving us a strategy for long-term population growth. I'll continue to do a lot of economic development work, and I'm excited to go up to Camp Grayling and, as Commander-in-Chief, inspect my troops this summer as well.
Thank you, Governor. Well, coming up on the rundown, while we're not even to the halfway point of 2023, we're going to talk about races in 2024 and 2026. That's when the Capitol Rundown returns. Welcome back. This is supposed to be an off year for elections. The next big one isn't until November 2024. But there are already folks with an eye on Michigan's open Senate seat, and even the governor's residence won't open up until 2026. Capitol correspondent Tim Skubic tells us about a couple of people who may already have their eyes on the prize.
Governor Gretchen Whitmer cannot run for re-election in 2026, and so that open seat will attract a whole host of Democrats and Republicans eager to replace her. Oakland County Democratic State Senator Mallory McMorrow is clearly interested in being governor, although she has not said anything publicly about this at all. Nonetheless, her team has looked all the pluses that she has that could lead to a race for governor. The first advantage, she has access to an impressive donor list not from Oakland County, but nationwide. Here's how that came about. During a Senate debate last year over gay rights, conservative Republican Senator Lana Tice accused Ms. Mallory of wanting to, quote, groom and sexualize children in an email campaign solicitation. Speaking directly to her colleague Ms. Tice, the senator delivered a fiery, passionate response that got 15.2 million hits on the internet.
I am the biggest threat to your hollow, hateful scheme. I know who I am. I know what faith and service means and what it calls for in this moment. We will not let hate win.
In the first 24 hours after that hit, 6,200 contributors sent $250,000 to the senator's campaign. 11,000 donors in all from all 50 states eventually kicked in $1.3 million in 3 months. She also got valuable nationwide media exposure on cable TV and in the New York Times, all combining to skyrocket her name ID among voters in the state. With the governor unable to run, it's likely that mostly men, including possibly Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan, could get into the contest, leaving Ms. McMorrow as the only woman or among a few women who might run as well. And being female has a built-in voter advantage, especially with Oakland County soccer moms who helped to elect Governor Whitmer. No decision has been made, and she will take the next year to sort all this out.
Thank you, Tim Skubic, for reporting that. Turning now back to 2024. We have learned that former Vice President Mike Pence plans to formally announce his bid for the White House in Iowa next week. But that didn't stop him from making a trip to Michigan this week. Pence appeared alongside the former head of the Michigan GOP and former U.S. Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos. The two spoke at Meyer Gardens about the future of conservatism in America. Pence says that the free market that gave Americans such a high standard of living.
Well, first and foremost, I really do believe that free enterprise and the free market has created the greatest standard of living in the history of the world. And ensuring and preserving limited government is an essential element to preserving the free market.
We also want to update you on the race for Michigan Senate seat. There's an opening being created by Debbie Stabenow's retirement, and there are a couple of other Democrats who would like to take her place. We begin with Pamela Pugh. She's already been elected to statewide office. She's currently the president of the State Board of Education. She has a doctorate in public health from the University of Michigan, and she worked for the Saginaw County Department of Public Health for 14 years. Pugh says her experience in science, education, and support for social justice are among the many reasons she could best serve Michiganders in the Senate.
I am Michigan made, and growing up in Saginaw, Michigan has made me strong. It certainly has prepared me to be the next U.S. Senator of this great state.
We also had the chance to sit down with Zach Burns this week as well. Burns says his family roots run so far back that his ancestors lived in Michigan before it was a state. He says he grew up in the middle class, but studied at Princeton and Oxford before becoming a lawyer. While Burns says he's only held office at the local level, that shouldn't stop him from getting elected to the U.S. Senate.
If you think Georgia's got two great senators, then I think we've answered your question to say, there's other ways of getting experience and knowing what it means to fight. During the pandemic, I was negotiating vaccine contracts around the world. I know what it's like to sit at the table in the middle of a crisis and make decisions.
We'll have more from our interview with Burns in next week's edition of The Rundown. But up next, it's time to talk with Capitol correspondent Tim Skubic about the week that was in Michigan politics. We'll be right back after the break. It's time now to catch up on the week in Michigan politics with the Dean of the Capitol Press Corps, Tim Skubic. We asked him to dig a little deeper into two stories that we've talked about, including the race for Michigan governor. But our Kira Lake started by asking him about the governor's drive to boost Michigan's population.
All right, Tim, thank you so much for joining us. And earlier in the show, we talked with the governor about growing Michigan's population. And it sounds like you would need a strategy that will last more than 3 or 4 years. How much power does the governor have when it comes to moving the needle?
Well, if she had a magic wand, she would be waving it across the entire nation, and the wand would say, come to Michigan. But she doesn't have a magical wand, but she is now going to have pretty soon, starting in July, a new commission that will look into this, quote, population problem. And the problem is basically this. We are getting older in the state of Michigan, and we have soon more older people than we have young people coming in. And that's a prescription for problems, and the governor knows that. The legislature knows that. So the governor, as governors want to do, and all of the governors have done this, they've created a commission to look at this problem or that problem, and population is one of those. So the question is, how do you get people to come into Michigan who are younger, that don't bring their Social Security card with them? And it's a huge thing. And now the governor's put together this commission, which has already drawn the flack from some Republicans who say this basically is, my words not theirs, a waste of time, that they're just going to come up with some, report that we ought to do this or do that. And at the end of the day, it won't make any difference. The governor obviously disagrees. But this clearly is a problem. And
now, we also saw your story earlier in the show about potential Democratic candidates for the governor's office in 2026. So does this mean there won't be a coronation for the would-be heir apparent in Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist?
Well, a coronation probably is not in the cards for the lieutenant governor, although the likelihood of him running is very high. We're talking about Mr. Gilchrist. Lieutenant governors don't generally want to be lieutenant governor for life, and so they want to move up. But it's very interesting because people are saying, wait a minute, the next governor's race is in 2026. Why in the world are you talking about candidates who might run now? Well, because that's what politics is. If you're going to run for a statewide office, you almost right now or soon, within the next year or so, have to be doing something about it. So the race for governor is not officially on, but the horses are lining up at the gate.
Appreciate your insight as always. And if you're interested in getting more political news from Michigan and Washington, we have just the thing for you. Sign up for our Capitol Rundown newsletter. It's just one email each week, and you can get it by pointing your cell phone camera right now at the screen. It will take you to the sign up page. And that's our show for this week. As always, thanks for watching the Capitol Rundown.